This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever find yourself playing the budgeting game? Well, with the Name Your Price tool from Progressive, you can find options that fit your budget and potentially lower your bills. Try it at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law. Not available in all states.
Hey, I'm running out to drop off a stack of letters and packages. Need anything shipped while I'm gone?
Save the gas. Stamps.com lets you print postage and schedule pickups right from your desk. Sync your contacts into the address book, get detailed accounting insights, and get notified the moment your certified mail is delivered.
All from my desk?
All from your desk.
Join the 4 million businesses using Stamps.com right now with code PODCAST and get your free welcome gift. Stamps.com, code PODCAST. Taxes and fees apply.
Yeah, if you want to. All right, first up, we have Vince Messerly, Streams and Wetlands Foundation. Vince, if you're in the room or online.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. My name is Vince Messerly. I'm the president of the Stream and Wetlands Foundation, a nonprofit organization based in Lancaster, Ohio, that provides compensatory mitigation through mitigation banks and in-lieu fee programs throughout the state. I'm a member of the building industry of Central Ohio and a current chair of the National Association of Home Builders Environmental Issues Committee. My comments today focus on the need for an efficient rulemaking process for a new WOTUS definition, including a regulatory preamble and guidance that fully complies with the key holdings under the Sackett and Rapanos plurality opinions. NEHB welcomed the agency's March 12, 25 announcement, simultaneously soliciting public's input on establishing a new WOTUS regulatory definition, while immediately issuing a joint agency memorandum to clarify the undefined regulatory phrase, continuous surface connection, when making Clean Water Act's 404 jurisdictional determinations. Under the joint memorandum, the agencies explain how to interpret the phrase continuous surface connection when federal regulators are determining whether a wetland meets the definition of adjacent wetland. The wetland must directly touch another WOTUS feature so that they are indistinguishable and cannot be separated from WOTUS featured by non-jurisdictional features such as man-made ditches, pipes, swales, and culverts. The need for the memorandum came from the agency's past practices during the AJD elevation process. That process resulted in wetlands separated from a WOTUS tributary or impoundment by non-jurisdictional features meeting both the continuous surface connection and relatively permanent standards. Such confusion is why in October 23, NEHB submitted a Freedom of Information Act request seeking access to agencies' internal guidance documents. Unfortunately, agencies refused to provide access to all the requested documents, deeming some of them as internal or deliberative documents. Despite the memorandum, the agencies must still correct the current WOTUS rules preamble. The preamble mistakenly interprets the undefined phrases of continuous surface connection and relatively permanent at odds with prior Supreme Court rulings and by recent guidance. I strongly encourage the agencies to use a clear and defined benchmark, such as flow rate. The agencies in the past have used 5 CFS as a threshold, or a watershed size. I believe it's important that this be something that can be determined 24/7, 365 days a year. It should not be based on flow duration or flow regime. These are too complex and will lead to too many discrepancies. While the need for a revised regulatory definition of WOTUS is clear, NEHB requests that the agencies avoid conducting a cumbersome two-step repeal and replace rulemaking. Specifically, the actual regulatory text found under the agency's conforming WOTUS rule comports with the Supreme Court's holdings under Sackett by removing references to legally invalid significant nexus test. In proposing a new WOTUS regulatory definition, the agencies could simply propose to amend the existing conforming WOTUS rule and include an entirely new regulatory preamble that comports with Sackett and Rapanos plurality opinions, while codifying the recent memorandum regarding the continuous surface connection and relatively permanent, along with other needed reforms. In summary, fortunately, the agencies do not need to start from scratch when proposing a new WOTUS regulatory definition. The Stream and Wetlands Foundation and NEHB look forward to working with you to develop and implement a new rule in the months to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Vince, for your comments. Next up, we have James McCulley. James? James, are you there?
Can you hear me now?
Okay. Oh, yes, there we go.
All right, awesome. Hello, good morning. My name is James McCauley. I own Watershed Eco LLC, an environmental consulting firm that's involved primarily in delineating, permitting, and mitigating federally regulated wetlands under the Clean Water Act. I work on the East Coast and Midwest regions of the United States and have been involved in this field for over 40 years. I started my career at the Philadelphia District as a biologist prior to joining the private sector in 1987. I'm a former president and current life director of the Home Builders Association of Delaware, a member of the South Carolina Home Builders Association, and I'm also a life delegate and previous Environmental Issues Committee member at the National Association of Home Builders. And I also served on the National Academy of Sciences Wetlands Characterization Committee in the 1990s. Today, I'm going to comment on the concept of continuous surface connection, which became important to the WOTUS conversation through the 2008 Rapanos guidance. Because the Supreme Court upheld its Rapanos plurality during the Sackett ruling in Sackett, and the 2023 rule made broad interpretations regarding connections between WOTUS features and adjacent wetlands, the concept of continuous surface connection is again critical in determining federal jurisdiction. On June 25th, 2024, the agencies issued an elevation memorandum from my old district in Philadelphia on a 360-acre site in Kent County, Delaware, a project which I delineated and submitted for a JD. This elevation memorandum sought clarity on whether a 16th of an acre wetland located 350 feet away from another jurisdictional feature and connected by a non-relatively permanent swale should also be considered a jurisdictional wetland. The agencies agreed that it was jurisdictional under the 2023 rule, even though Sackett ruling determined that wetlands are jurisdictional only if directly abut and therefore indistinguishable from another WOTUS feature. Even lower courts agree that indistinguishability is a key element in establishing that a wetland is WOTUS. The Fifth Circuit, for example, rejected the jurisdiction of a wetland in the Lewis case, where the nearest relatively permanent body of water was separated by ditches, culverts, and non-relatively permanent tributary. Fortunately, on March 12th, the agency's memorandum on continuous surface connection clarified that adjacent wetlands cannot be separated by swales, ditches, berms, dikes, or culverts.
Thank you, James, for your comments. Next up, we have Evan Bronowski.
Having time cues for people.
Evan, if you can
Yes.
use the mic near you and unmute.
Hello. Thanks. Hello, my name is Evan Bernowski, and I am Senior Program Manager for Environmental Policy at the National Association of Home Builders. Today, I'm representing over 140,000 firms engaged in home construction and mixed-use development. Our members routinely conduct earth moving and grading activities that may impact federally regulated waters and require Section 404 wetland permits. Today, 5 NAHB members from 5 states, you've already heard from 2, and myself will provide oral comments on topics such as relatively permanent and continuous surface connection, the jurisdictional status of ditches, and recommendations on ways to make the permitting process more efficient. In addition, NAHB submitted recommendations in response to the agency's request for recommendations on March 24th, 2025. Specifically, the agencies should correct ambiguity from the 2023 rule pertaining to relatively permanent and continuous surface connection to ensure that core districts and others do not misinterpret the Sackett holding. Likewise, they should revise the definition of adjacent to clarify that jurisdictional wetlands must be indistinguishable from other jurisdictional features, exclude ephemeral and most intermittent ditches, eliminate categories that are redundant or unnecessary as a result of Sackett, and revise and expand several existing exclusions, including recodifying with minor edits the definition of prior converted cropland from the Navigable Waters Protection Rule. NAHB requests that the agencies move quickly to make these changes. We have an opportunity to address over 30 years of uncertainty and provide unprecedented clarity because of Sackett. NAHB believes that the agencies may revise the federal definition of WOTUS in one step because the current regulatory text correctly includes terms and concepts that align with key holdings of the Sackett and Rapanos rulings. The agencies also have an opportunity to make other aspects of the permitting program more efficient. NAHB asks that the agencies move quickly to reissue nationwide permits before they expire in March 2026. They should also consider increasing their threshold acreage from 1/2 acre and honor the timelines of pre-construction notifications associated with the Endangered Species Act. Regarding the 1/2 acre threshold, that figure has declined over time from 10 acres in the 1980s to 3 acres in the 90s to a 1/2 acre today. Also, NAHB members routinely face delays in nationwide permit issuance due to the failure of core district offices to notify Fish and Wildlife or the Marine Fisheries Service of an activity's potential to affect a federally listed species or designated critical habitat. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. Our members and I look forward to working with you to develop a new rule in the months to come.
Thank you, Evan. All right, next we have Harold Phelps. Harold, you can unmute.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Great. All right. Hello and good morning. I am Harold Phelps, CEO of Phelps Engineering, a civil engineering and consulting firm in Olathe, Kansas. I'm a former president of the Home Builders Association of Greater Kansas City and am currently a senior life director of the National Association of Home Builders. Thank you for the opportunity to provide comments today. I'll discuss the jurisdictional status of ditches under the Clean Water Act, Section 404 Wetland Permitting Program. Ditches such as roadway drainage and irrigation ditches are some of the most common landscape fixtures that builders and developers encounter during the construction and land development process. For example, the Federal Highway Administration requires placement of road ditches along 3.9 million miles of roads in the continental U.S. Originally, the Corps had excluded non-navigable man-made ditches from the Clean Water Act. However, that changed in the early 2000s when the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit ruled in the U.S. versus Deaton that a man-made roadside ditch 8 miles from the nearest traditional navigable water and separated by several dams and culverts could be considered jurisdictional. The Deaton ruling illustrates two common problems that jurisdictional ditches create for the home building industry. First, to accommodate road crossings, utility lines, water and sewer infrastructure, builder and developers must install culverts while avoiding impacts to jurisdictional ditches. Alternatively, they must first obtain expensive and complex federal wetland permits that could require mandatory compensatory mitigation requirements. Second, once a ditch is deemed jurisdictional, wetlands that drain into it could likewise become jurisdictional adjacent wetlands. Fortunately, after the Rapanos ruling, the agencies issued guidance to clarify that they would not assert jurisdiction over ditches excavated wholly in or draining upon wetlands that lacked relative permanent flow. Taken at face value, the guidance excludes all intermittent and ephemeral ditches located in or draining only upland area from jurisdictions and by extension, all wetlands bordering such ditches. I appreciate the agencies reinforce this guidance in their memorandum on continuous service connection issued March 12, 2025. The memorandum clarifies that jurisdictional wetlands must abut relatively permanent tributaries, meaning they cannot be separated by ditches, berms, dikes, swells, and culverts. Further, the memorandum requires all adjacent wetlands to be indistinguishable from relatively permanent waters of the U.S. features. I urge EPA and the Corps to clarify in a rulemaking that all intermittent and ephemeral ditches are non-jurisdictional and codify into regulation the key elements of the recent continuous surface connection memorandum concerning adjacent wetlands. On behalf of the Home Builders Association of Greater Kansas City and the National Association of Home Builders, thank you for the time today.
Thank you very much, Harold. Actually, up next we have Eugene Graff. Eugene?
All right. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Eugene Graff. I'm a residential developer and builder from Bozeman, Montana. I'm a member of the Southwest Montana Building Industry Association and a life director of the National Association of Home Builders. Thank you for providing industry stakeholders with the opportunity to provide recommendations of the definition of the waters of the United States, or WOTUS. Today, my comments focus on the concept of relatively permanent waters. Because Montana does not regulate beyond WOTUS, The extent of federal jurisdiction is the sole determinant of the state for obtaining wetland dredge and fill permits. For nearly 40 years, the federal definition of WOTUS under the Clean Water Act has expanded and contracted, but finally the Supreme Court's ruling in Sackett versus the EPA provides the agencies with guidance on the flow duration necessary to define water body or landscape features, i.e. streams, creek, drainage ditches as WOTUS. In Sackett, the Supreme Court upheld their plurality opinion from Rapanos versus the U.S. In Rapanos, the court stated that the phrase water of the United States does not include channels through which water flows intermittently or firmly, or channels that periodically provide drainage or rainfall. Based on this statement, the conforming rule to 2023 revised definitions of waters of the United States uses accurate language regarding relatively permanent standing or continuous flowing bodies of water. Unfortunately, the regulatory preamble of the conforming rule includes descriptions of the concept relatively permanent, so broad it encompasses dry channels, roadside drainage ditches, and other often dry features that possess flows only in response to rainfall events. Under the final rules preamble, the agency can consider these features CWA jurisdiction tributaries and other interstate waters. To address the uncertainty, the agency must define relatively permanent more precisely. To do that, they can look again to Rapanos' plurality opinion, which explains that a stream flowing 290 days might be, but is not necessarily jurisdictional. Clearly, according to the Supreme Court, all ephemeral features and most intermittent features should not be subject to federal jurisdiction under the Clean Water Act. Montana building and development industry and our colleagues at NHB look forward to working with agencies to develop and implement a new WOTUS rule that currently incorporates the court's relatively permanent directive. Clarity will help us develop more land for housing and to deliver affordable homes to ease Americans' ongoing housing crisis and make the American dream more available to working families. Thank you for the opportunity today.
All right, so I think next we have David Jessup.
Actually, I'm not sure
Yeah.
why we show it as David. It's actually Howard Nelson.
Oh, it is Howard Nelson. Okay,
Yes.
sorry.
No,
We had
not
a
a-
mix up on
Not
the
a
names
problem at all.
inside.
Thanks for fixing that, though. My
Thanks,
name is
Howard.
Howard Nelson. I'm an environmental attorney, and I head the environmental practice at the Miami-based law firm of Bills and Sundberg. We represent several national home builders throughout both Florida and the eastern seaboard in pre-acquisition analysis, permitting, and post-acquisition remediation. I regularly represent clients in complex wetland permitting matters. I'm a member of the Builders Association of South Florida and serve as co-chair of their environmental committee. I'm also a member of the Florida Home Builders Association and the National Association of Home Builders. My comments will focus on what we believe to be the 5 necessary exclusions in any future WOTUS rulemaking. First is that the agency should follow precedent and continue to exclude certain ditches and, based upon the language of the guidance, distinctive features from the definition of WOTUS, beginning with the 2008 Rapanos guidance and continuing on to Navigable Waters Protective Rule conforming rules. However, in future rulemaking, the WOTUS exclusion should align with the clear language in Sackett and categorically exclude ephemeral and intermittent tributaries and therefore ditches from federal jurisdiction. In addition, the agency should follow the precedent set in the NWPR and place the burden of proof for determining the jurisdictional status of historic ditches upon the agencies rather than the permittee or applicant. Third, the agency should revise the existing exclusion for swales and erosional features characterized by low volume, infrequent, and short duration flow. Because of SACIT, the agencies can, and we believe should, exclude those features as they do not have relatively permanent, standing, or continuous water that would render the wetland indistinguishable from the WOTUS. Fourth, the agency should expand the artificial lakes and pond exclusion by eliminating the requirement that the features be used exclusively for purposes such as stormwater management, irrigation, settling basins, or rice growing. There are many other uses for these artificial or man-made ponds that do not and should not extend WOTUS jurisdiction. And finally, the agency should exclude stormwater control features.
Recording stopped. Recording in progress.
Constructed to convey, treat, or store stormwater. Both the Clean Water Act and the NWPR exclude such features in the regulatory text. We need greater clarity in the exclusion and what becomes, to use the guidance document, non-jurisdictional ditches versus jurisdictional ditches. Thank you very much for your time today, and we look forward to continuing to work with the agency on future rulemaking.
Thank you very much, Howard. Apologies for the name again. Next, we have Priyanka.
Thank you for the opportunity to provide comments today on behalf of the American Road and Transportation Builders Association, ARPA, and our more than 8,000 members in the transportation construction industry. My name is Priyanka Sharma, and I serve as Vice President and Counsel for Regulatory Affairs. Our members in both the public and private sectors work to plan, design, construct, and maintain the infrastructure that moves America. They're committed to balancing reliable, safe transportation with responsible environmental stewardship. For over 50 years, ARPA members have struggled with the shifting definition of water as the United States. Regulatory uncertainty is not just a paperwork issue, it's the death of innovation. In cold weather states, permitting delays can mean missing an entire construction season, slowing down critical safety upgrades. While the 2023 conforming rule issued after the SACIT decision attempted to respond by replacing significant nexus with relatively permanent, that change alone isn't enough. The rule still leaves too much room for confusion and fails to fully comply with the court's clear direction. ARPA supports a formal revision, not a repeal, to the 2023 rule. The current rule should be used as a foundation for a stronger, clearer framework. We also urge the agencies to categorically exclude roadside ditches and ephemeral drainage features from WOTUS jurisdiction. These are not streams, they're tools designed to direct stormwater away from roadways and protect drivers. This exclusion has been longstanding in both policy and practice. However, last year, actions were taken to bring ditches back under WOTUS jurisdiction. A ditch that's dry most of the year isn't a navigable water and shouldn't be regulated like one. The term relatively permanent must also be clearly defined. Without objective standards, it invites inconsistent interpretations. Flow characteristics may be one such tool. And the definition of adjacent must reflect how infrastructure actually works. Roads, berms, and other structures are often built to block or divert water, not connect it. Yet under the current rule, some features may be regulated simply because they're nearby, even when there's no surface connection at all. This amounts to regulation by proximity. Finally, ARPA has heard from members who have waited to receive an AJD only to have it reversed midway through a project. It's essential that the agencies preserve valid AJDs. Reversing course mid-project only compounds delays and undermines trust in the regulatory system. In conclusion, clean water and clear rules can coexist. We urge the agencies to revise the rule to reflect the law and give our industry the certainty it needs to keep people and goods moving safely, reliably, and on time. We appreciate the opportunity to share these comments and our written comments and look forward to working with you on a durable and lasting solution. Thank you.
Thank you, Priyanka. All right, next up we have Emily Coiner. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks to EPA and the Corps for holding this session. I'm Emily Coiner, Senior Environmental Policy Director at the National Stone, Sand, and Gravel Association. Our members are responsible for the stone, sand, and gravel used in road and public work projects, as well as erosion control, wastewater treatment, and drinking water purification systems. Aggregate companies take naturally occurring rock from the ground, then crush and sort it. When aggregate producers finish using the stone, sand, or gravel in the area, they return the land to other productive uses such as drinking water reservoirs and nature preserves. The determination of Clean Water Act jurisdiction is critical. Aggregate operations cover large areas and are often located near bodies of water. The scope and reach of Clean Water Act jurisdiction have a direct impact on the costs of planning, financing, constructing, and operating an aggregates operation. NSSJ supports the administration's efforts to clarify the extent of jurisdiction under SACIT, including the end of jurisdiction over isolated wetlands via non-jurisdictional features, as well as the rescission of the coordination memos. Here are a few of our points. Ordinary high water mark alone cannot create jurisdiction. Our members have reported that the mere presence of ordinary high water mark, even in ditches, is being used to exert jurisdiction over remote features. Ephemeral water should be clearly exempted. While relatively permanent flow should exclude numerous features, at a minimum, ephemeral features need to be exempt. The ditch exemption needs to be expanded and well-defined. Most ditches should be exempt from WOTUS. Only channelized portions of relatively permanent water should be considered WOTUS. The pits exemption must include idle areas. The current pits exemption needs to be expanded to include non-active sites. Aggregate operations pause for seasonal and project-related issues, as well as reclamation. Purpose-built features that fill with water when not being actively pumped should not be considered WOTUS. The waste treatment exemption also needs to be better defined to include settling ponds. The longstanding waste treatment exemption should include a definition that includes settling ponds and conveyances. Also, groundwater should be exempt. Groundwater, including shallow subsurface flow, is not WOTUS. Finally, the AJD backlog needs to be cleared and processing incentivized. AJDs are an important part of the Clean Water Act regulation and need to be prioritized by the Corps. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Emily. Next up, we have Courtney Briggs virtually. Courtney?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Courtney Briggs. I'm the Senior Director of Government Affairs at the American Farm Bureau Federation. I'm proud to be here representing the farm and ranch families that produce the food, fiber, and fuel that our country and the world depends on. I'm joining you from Mississippi, so I'm having some WOTUS FOMO right now, but I've been spending time on farm with our members this week, and I'm hearing a lot about WOTUS. I also serve as chair of the Waters Advocacy Coalition, which is a multi-industry coalition spanning many industry sectors, including agriculture, real estate and construction, energy development, manufacturing, recreation, and many others. We appreciate the fact that the Trump administration is working to bring the WOTUS rule in line with the SACIT decision. In both AFBF and WAC's comments, we thoroughly outline what we want in a rule, which is a rule that respects congressional intent, upholds the plurality decision in SACIT, and balances the Clean Water Act's cooperative federalism objective. And I agree with Mr. Messerly in what he advised you to do. There's no need for a two-step process. Start with the Biden rule and make the important changes to bring it in line with SACIT. We need some context as to what relatively permanent means, and I understand that this is a difficult exercise. I, along with many others on this call, have spent a lot of time trying to understand the plurality's decision in Rapanos. But I'd like to highlight that there are many references throughout the opinion stating that intermittent and ephemeral streams are not a WOTUS. But we also know that Justice Scalia referenced an example of a 290-day flowing stream to illustrate a scenario where a stream may dry up for short periods of time. However, he indicated that this 290-day flowing stream isn't necessarily relatively permanent. I highlight this because it's rather incredible that this example served as the basis for the post-Rapanos guidance, where it was decided that streams flowing for 90 days or even less could be regulated as a relatively permanent water. I honestly don't know how to make sense of this. Taking all of this together, I think it's obvious that the court did not intend for a 90-day flowing stream to be jurisdictional. Additionally, it's worth reinforcing that there is no question ephemerals must be categorically excluded, as well as many intermittent streams. On adjacency, the court was crystal clear. It means directly abutting and indistinguishable, where we can't tell where the water ends and the wetland begins. Any new rule must reflect this concept. Exemptions are essential to farmers' operations, and exemptions are only as good as how well they are written. An unclear exemption doesn't provide protections and are essentially worthless. Farm fields are made up of complex networks of ditches and water conveyances and control features that are necessary in order to support growing crops and raising animals. The agency must exempt all ditches, but especially upland cut ditches that convey water off of a farm field from the definition of WOTUS, and only regulate ditches that are constructed in a regulated, relatively permanent water. Additionally, the full suite of exemptions in the Navigable Waters Protection Rule must be preserved, including clarity on the longstanding prior converted cropland regulatory exemption. And I agree with the notion already mentioned by Mr. Nelson on shifting the burden of proof. Finally, we'd like to extend an offer to any EPA and Army Corps employee to visit a farm. AFBF members would be honored to host you and show you the real-world implications of the definition of WOTUS. Thank you so much for the time to speak today, and we look forward to working with you on this new rule.
Thank you, Courtney. All right, up next we have Jay Bragg. Jay?
So good morning. My name is Jay Bragg. I'm Associate Director of Commodity and Regulatory Affairs for Texas Farm Bureau. I've been on staff with Texas Farm Bureau for more than 15 years, but I've worked with farmers and ranchers on implementing conservation practices and compliance with water quality goals for the last 25 years. The expansive interpretation of waters of the U.S. has been extremely concerning, particularly for those involved with conservation work. They move protections that are intended for lakes and rivers and streams into cropland fields and manage flood control structures, grassed waterways, and other drainage features on farm. The cost associated with the noncompliance of the Clean Water Act are just simply too high for farmers to go through and have to risk violations and possible litigation over noncompliance. They should be able to go and walk out of their farms. They're the ones that are most familiar with the landscape, but they should be able to make these determinations without consultants or engineers, and much greater certainty is needed and clarity as far as what a water is and what a water is not. And our belief is that relatively permanent features should be what waters are. Exclusions for ephemeral or there should be exclusions for ephemeral and intermittent features, or any other man-made feature that is used for stormwater management, conservation, or livestock water. We'd also stress that the wetlands must be defined as was prescribed in SACIC and limited. Again, farmers should be able to know that they know what areas of their fields are. They should be able to walk out of their back door and have a great idea of what those features are. We certainly appreciate the opportunity to provide comments on these. I know they're brief, but again, I will echo what Courtney said prior to my statements here. But we'll be more than welcome to host EPA, Corps of Engineers on field tours any place in the state. I think we probably have one of the more diverse states in the country. So again, any place, we'd be more than happy to help you.
Thank you very much, Jay. Up next, we have Melinda Tomeno. Melinda?
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can, Melinda.
Perfect. Thank you so much. My name is Melinda Tomeno. I work with the Associated General Contractors of America. AGC is a national commercial trade association that represents more than 28,000 firms. Our members contribute to and build the infrastructure that we depend on every single day. The scope of federal control over water determines whether we can move forward in a timely manner with projects that improve communities across the nation. In our written comments, AGC urges the administration to address the deficiencies raised in litigation against the 2023 conforming rule, and in turn provide the clear, predictable, and enduring WOTUS definition that I think we all admit is sorely needed. In following a strict reading of the statute and Supreme Court decisions, WOTUS encompasses three main categories: traditional interstate navigable waters and territorial seas being one, two, rivers, streams, lakes, and ponds that are relatively permanent, standing, or continuously flowing bodies of water and are connected to Category 1 waters, and three, wetlands with a continuous surface connection to Category 1 or 2 waters. Importantly, most ditches, including roadside ditches, should be excluded unless they convey perennial flow to Category 1 waters, were constructed in a WOTUS, or relocate or alter a WOTUS. I promise that's the only legal sounding part of my remarks today. But we also encourage the agencies to retain some of the long-standing exclusions that we have grown to depend on. I'm going to mention three of our favorites, which are, of course, ditches, which should be excluded, including the roadside ditches. If the ditch exclusion is too narrow, it could hinder our industry's ability to maintain safe operations. And because, these help prevent flooding and damage to roadways. Secondly, excluding other stormwater features. The construction industry relies on stormwater control features to fulfill our permit obligations under the NIPD's Section 402 Stormwater Program, and these features must be maintained to continue to perform effectively. Third, clearly exclude water-filled depressions. This will help ensure that vegetation growing in old tire tracks made from construction equipment are not considered federal waters. We also encourage the agencies to embrace opportunities to streamline the permitting process, as well as look at some of the tools that, for better or for worse, wind up underpinning some of the permitting decisions, such as the ordinary high watermark manual and wetlands mappers, to ensure that they are updated and applicable post-SACIT and not used to illegitimately expand jurisdiction. I want to thank you for this opportunity to provide feedback, especially verbally, so I can share these remarks without sharing my cold, and look forward to the administration some more on one of our favorite topics. So thank you.
Appreciate that and appreciate your courtesy to us, Melinda. All right, up next we have Ross Ford. I believe he's joined online.
Yes, thank you and good morning. My name is Ross Ford. I'm a builder and a developer and currently the CEO for the Home Builders Association of Utah. Today I wanted to focus on why it's critical that the definition of waters of the U.S. or WOTUS must be broad enough to protect true water resources, but also simple, logical, and consistent enough for real-world application. Utah is extremely arid. Water is precious, rare, and often seasonal. Historically, much of our state was under ancient Lake Bonneville, meaning much of Utah is technically old lake beds. If WOTUS definitions are written too narrowly, millions of acres would unintentionally fall under federal control. That was never the intent of the Clean Water Act. WOTUS definitions are also foundational to stormwater management. Every project must have stormwater protection plans, inspections, and permits based on these definitions. This directly impacts the cost of housing. In 2024, Utah issued just over 25,000 permits, impacting less than 0.0061% of our landmass at a staggering compliance cost of more than $100 million. Many areas of our state are geographically isolated. Stormwater there could never physically reach rivers, streams, or lakes. Water simply infiltrates into the desert floor or evaporates. Yet developers are still required to comply with expensive stormwater WOTUS regulations, not to protect actual water, but to protect the theoretical definition of WOTUS. We all want clean water. We all want responsible development. But a vague or overly broad WOTUS definition hurts people by dramatically increasing costs, wasting precious resources, and stalling critical infrastructure projects. Industry thrives when the rules are simple, logical, and consistent. Government must create a WOTUS definition that is easy to understand, easy to follow, and enforced equally, with clear penalties for government officials who stray from the established law. The American people deserve clarity, fairness, and a regulatory system that protects real water without punishing progress. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much, Ross. Next up, we have Beth Melito.
Thank you. My name is Beth Melito, and I'm the Vice President for the National Federation of Independent Business Small Business Legal Center. NFIB represents nearly 300,000 small and independent small businesses across the country, including many small home builders, family farms, and contractors. In crafting a rule on waters of the United States that will bring clarity and conformity with Sackett versus EPA, NFIB requests first and foremost that the agencies take special account of the needs of small and independent businesses with respect to their private property. To this end, NFIB recommends that the agencies are guided by 4 principles. 1, regulated entities benefit from easily understood, bright line rules as compared to multi-factor tests or amorphous concepts. 2, nothing will be gainfully accomplished if the post-Sackett debate merely shifts to back and forth interpretations of relatively permanent and continuous surface connection. 3, all of the Clean Water Act statutory text, including the qualifier navigable, must be faithfully applied. And 4, ditches are not waters of the United States. The decision in Sackett versus EPA makes clear that, quote, the Clean Water Act's use of waters encompasses only those relatively permanent, standing, or continuously flowing bodies of water described in ordinary parlance as streams, oceans, rivers, and lakes. That term, ordinary parlance, provides the bright line rule on the meaning of waters under the Clean Water Act. Finally, I'd like to underscore the legal requirement that federal agencies must account for the impact their regulations have on small businesses. Congress has declared that the failure to recognize differences in the scale and resources of regulated entities adversely affects competition in the marketplace, discourages innovation, and restricts improvements in productivity. NFIB recommends that EPA and the Army revise CWA rules to give small business owners acting in good faith compliance an opportunity to correct a violation and come into compliance without fines or enforcement actions, and state that fines or enforcement action against small businesses will occur only in cases of willful repeated violations. Thank you for your time today. On behalf of NFIB and the nearly 300,000 small business members it represents, I am hopeful that the forthcoming regulations and enforcement practices from this administration conform to the Supreme Court's decision in Sackett versus EPA while minimizing burdens on landowners and maximizing respect for the property rights of Americans. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Beth. Next up, we have Laura Campbell. Laura?
Good morning. Are you able to hear me?
We sure can. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, good morning again. My name is Laura Campbell with Michigan Farm Bureau. We're an organization representing more than 40,000 farming families across the state. And while a state certainly does not have to have delegated authority like Michigan does in order to develop its own regulatory protection for streams, lakes, and wetlands, Michigan is a good example of Congress's intent when it wrote into the Clean Water Act that states have the primary responsibility to prevent, reduce, and eliminate pollution in waters within their own jurisdictions. State primacy is crucial to implementing the direction the Supreme Court gave in its most recent decision in Sackett, as well as other major decisions on the Clean Water Act like Rapanos. The United States has a wide variety of climates and conditions through which waterways move, and trying to develop a comprehensive federal regulation to address all forms of connectivity water might have, from Southwest deserts to Gulf wetlands to the Great Lakes, is impossible. EPA and the Corps need to recognize that regulating waters of the United States must be part of an integrated strategy, acting cooperatively between the basic level of federal regulation for navigable waters and its connected wetlands, and the region-specific regulations states have the power to enact to protect waters outside of federal jurisdiction. Otherwise, EPA and the Corps run the risk of implementing a rule that is overreaching for some areas of the country and not protective enough for others. states. EPA and the Corps have asked for feedback on defining terms applicable to what should be federally regulated as a water of the United States. Under the guideline of giving primacy to states for their own water protection, the Supreme Court has been clear. To be a water of the United States, a water must be relatively permanent. That is, according to the plurality opinion in Rapanos, a water that might dry up under the extraordinary circumstances like a drought, but which otherwise does not flow just intermittently or ephemerally, and which does not solely carry rainfall drainage. This definition should apply to any federally regulated water, whether a natural stream or lake or a constructed ditch. Similarly, the term a continuous surface connection for a wetland to also be considered a water of the United States was defined by the Supreme Court in Sackett. Such a wetland must be indistinguishable from the water of the U.S. it connects to, not separated by a natural or legally constructed barrier. It can't be connected solely by groundwater or ephemeral streams, ditches, or man-made conveyances. It must have that surface connection, and the connection must be so strong that it cannot be separated from its attached navigable water of the U.S. By making federal regulation consistent, clear, and by leaving room for state primacy in regulating other streams, lakes, wetlands, and water features, EPA and the Corps can implement a rule that is both consistent with the Supreme Court's decisions and with Congress's intent in the Clean Water Act. We look forward to working with EPA and the Corps to implement this vision and are happy to discuss further how states can best position themselves to determine waters important to their regions to protect those beyond federal jurisdiction. Thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you very much, Laura. All right, next up we have Robert Helland. Robert, if you can unmute.
Good morning. I'm Bob Helland. I'm the Director of Congressional and Federal Affairs for the Golf Course Superintendents Association of America. GCSAA is the professional association for the women and men who maintain the game's most valuable resource, the golf course. Since 2014, GCSA has been working with the agencies as well as our allies in the Waters Advocacy Coalition to try to implement a regulatory regime that both promotes and protects clean water and clear rules. Our golf courses are designed as a water conveyance system in order to best manage water flow from the storm water, flood, or irrigation that comes either through natural or man-made conveyances. Our courses are designed to collect this water, as well as the water from adjacent properties for flood control and pollution prevention. We use this runoff as irrigation sources as well. What happens with our golf courses is the water comes in, we use it, and it comes off. But it is very important for us that the agencies issue a rule that will be complies with what we do as an industry. The United States Supreme Court in Sackett limited a WOTUS to traditional interstate navigable waters, relatively permanent bodies of waters connected to traditional interstate navigable waters, and wetlands that had a continuous surface connection to the first two. Continuous surface connection meant the wetland and waterway must be indistinguishable. Unfortunately, the amended 2023 rule issued subsequent to Sackett did not comply with that court decision, and as a result has created a lack of clarity that is impacting golf's operations. Therefore, we are very grateful for the opportunity to both file comments last week as well as to present our testimony today. When it comes to relatively permanent waters, we agree that a more easily understood policy should be implemented at the federal level. Because of the environmental variation and complexity across the United States for items such as flow, duration, we first and foremost respectfully request that agencies limit the federal regulatory authority over relatively permanent waters to perennial waters, those with year-round flow, in order to eliminate any issues of ambiguity and uncertainty. Should the agencies decide to include additional intermittent waters, we suggest that the definition be kept simple. Should the proposed rule or any regulation incorporate jurisdiction over intermittent streams, our industry believes that the definition of intermittent flow should focus on things as 90 days of consecutive flow and or inundation, but not on things like volumetric considerations or traditional physical characteristics such as ordinary high water mark and debris.
Albert, I'm so sorry, your time is up.
Oh, my apologies. Thank you for the opportunity to talk.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you, Bob. All right, next up we have Keith Lyric. Keith?
Good morning. My name is Keith Lyric, Natural Resources Director with the North Carolina Farm Bureau Federation, and thank you for the opportunity to provide comments today. I agree with many of the comments made so far, especially by my Farm Bureau colleagues. For too long, the agencies have sought to steadily expand the definition of WOTUS beyond what Congress and the Supreme Court have intended, and they've had to be reined in several times, most recently in the Sackett decision. We appreciate that EPA is seeking recommendations to bring the WOTUS definition in line with Sackett, and we have several suggestions to that end. The jurisdictional status of wetlands and ditches are of particular importance to North Carolina farmers. Sackett provided clarity by stating that to be jurisdictional, wetlands must directly abut a WOTUS in such a way that the WOTUS and the wetland are indistinguishable from one another. Wetlands must be adjacent to a WOTUS in such a way that the wetland has a continuous surface connection with that water, making it difficult to determine where the water ends and the wetland begins. Sackett also makes it clear that that continuous surface connection must be a continuous surface water connection, not something like a dry ditch or a culvert. The Biden rule's definition of adjacency violated Sackett by interpreting that to mean a physical connection does not need to be a surface hydrologic connection, and by not requiring wetlands to directly abut a relatively permanent water. EPA should correct these improper interpretations in the upcoming WOTUS revision. Ditches and constructed water features commonly found on farms that are used to collect, convey, or retain water must be excluded from the definition of WOTUS. Agencies should adopt the approach to ditches and artificial ponds from the Navigable Waters Protection Rule, which appropriately recognize the practical realities surrounding ditches on farm and ranch lands. Ditches and other water features such as irrigation and stock watering ponds constructed on ag land should be excluded so long as they're not constructed in a WOTUS. And we strongly support the NWPR statement that agencies bear the burden of proof to demonstrate that a ditch relocated a tributary or was constructed in a tributary or an adjacent wetland. These clarifications provided much certainty to farmers and ranchers about how these interpretations would be carried forward and should be carried forward in the upcoming WOTUS revision. Lastly, we recommend that the agencies revise the definition of prior converted cropland by recodifying the definition in the 2020 NWPR. That definition codified the decades-long interpretation that PCC only loses its status for Clean Water Act purposes where it has been abandoned and has reverted to wetlands. Thank you again for the opportunity to comment, and we look forward to working with you in the future.
Thank you very much, Keith. Next up, we have Amy Emmert. Amy?
Good morning. My name is Amy Emmert, and I'm here today on behalf of the American Petroleum Institute. First, thank you for engaging with us today. Second, thank you for your express commitment to protecting federal waters with a complete and accurate interpretation of the Sackett decision. We believe the deficiencies in the final 2023 conforming rule are significant enough to merit a corrective rulemaking rather than just mere guidance. Third, and perhaps most importantly, our members would like to see an enduring rule where it will be clear to the ordinary non-expert observer which waters are federal. API belongs to the Waters Advocacy Coalition. Our comments align with WAC on critical issues where the agency's requested comments. However, our comments can also be considered WAC plus because we request more specific changes and even provide draft regulatory text. Our positions are outlined in detail on the table of contents on page 3 of our comments, and the additional requests are as followed. Wetlands on the north slope of Alaska and other Alaskan permafrost underlaid tundra should not be considered jurisdictional unless they meet the guideposts in Sackett. This change will be critical to the timely realization of the goals for Alaska outlined in President Trump's Day 1 executive order unleashing Alaskan energy. Seasonal surface flow should be defined as continuous flow of at least 90 consecutive days per year during years of typical precipitation. Greater clarity is needed in the definitions of ordinary high water mark, high tide line, and bankful, particularly when considering storm events. The USACE should rescind the ordinary high watermark manual with the ordinary high watermark policy reverting to longstanding RGL-505. Past use should not be considered when determining WOTUS. When revising the preamble, the agency should make the most of opportunities to provide examples of non-jurisdictional features and the scope of exclusions. We would also welcome a return to the clear and concise exclusions list from the 2015 rule that was maintained in the 2020 Navigable Waters Protection Rule. Both the wastewater treatment exemption and the stormwater management exclusions are essential and should not be weakened. We'd like to see an abandonment duration for prior converted croplands be increased to 10 years. We also believe that there are other essential exclusions, which include but are not limited to those covering artificial lakes and ponds, including water storage ponds, impoundments, and associated conveyances, groundwater, and green infrastructure. We cannot emphasize enough how important the exclusions list is to both companies and field officers. Thank you again, and please don't hesitate to contact us if you have any questions about our positions. Our members and our water team will always welcome the ability to engage with you further. We appreciate this forum and look forward to seeing how you decide to fully implement the SACIT decision.
Thank you, Amy. Next up, we have Garrett Hawkins. Garrett.
Okay. Good morning. My name is Garrett Hawkins. I'm a fifth-generation farmer from Appleton City, Missouri. I also serve as president of the Missouri Farm Bureau, our state's largest and oldest general farm organization. Thank you for your commitment to formulate a durable and clear definition of waters of the United States. In Missouri, we have nearly 88,000 farms, and our farmers raise everything from corn and soybeans and cotton to pigs, cattle, and poultry. Unfortunately, we've lived in a world of regulatory uncertainty for decades due to ever-changing rulemakings that redefine the scope of the Clean Water Act. We have seen WOTUS definitions, guidance, and legal arguments change with each administration. Farmers, landowners, and small businesses are the ones who suffer the most when we don't have clear rules. We've been left guessing whether features like ditches, stock ponds, and low spots on our farms might suddenly fall under federal jurisdiction. This uncertainty forces us to hire experts just to get guidance on whether we can use common agricultural practices on our farms. For decades, we've been living under a guilty until proven innocent regime because previous administrations have interpreted the Clean Water Act too broadly, leaving the threat of violations with penalties of up to $50,000 per day hanging over our heads. Simply put, we need bright jurisdictional lines. That's why we support the agency's plan to better align the current rule with the SACIT decision and provide more certainty to Clean Water Act enforcement. We urge a simplified rule that includes 3 categories. 1, traditional interstate navigable waters and territorial seas. 2, relatively permanent, standing, or continuously flowing rivers, streams, lakes, and ponds connected to traditional interstate navigable waters. And 3, wetlands with a continuous surface connection to the first 2. Clear definitions for relatively permanent and continuous surface connection are essential. Ephemeral and intermittent waters must be excluded because they are not, by law or logic, WOTUS. Likewise, jurisdictional ditches should be narrowly defined, and unnecessary categories like impoundments or isolated intrastate lakes should be removed unless they meet strict criteria. Finally, exclusions to the rule must be strengthened and clarified. That includes protections for prior converted cropland, stormwater control features, waste treatment systems, and common ag ponds without being limited to whether they were built on dry land. Missouri farmers are asking for clarity, not confusion, as we've specified in written comments on April 23rd. Thank you again for your time and consideration.
Thank you very much, Garrett. Next up, we have Michael Formica. Michael?
Good morning. I'm Michael Formica. I represent the National Pork Producers Council, which is a trade association of the nation's hog farmers. We are also members of the Water Advocacy Coalition. Nation's hog farmers are firm supporters of the Clean Water Act's goals and are committed to responsibly and wisely managing their farms to protect and restore water quality. However, like others in agriculture, they are concerned by past overreach that sought to use WOTUS as a tool to illegally exert federal control over private property and take away their freedom to farm. The time is right for the agency to take action, listen to stakeholders, and develop a long-lasting, durable definition of WOTUS. In that light, I offer the following suggestions. First, there is a need for targeted, expedited rulemaking to fully conform WOTUS to SACIT. It should simplify the rule to just 3 categories: traditional interstate navigable waters, relatively permanent, standing, or continuously flowing rivers, streams, lakes, and ponds connected to those waters and wetlands with a continuous surface connection to either of the two categories. Following Sackett, it is clear that WOTUS is only intended to include those three categories. The agency should delete other categories as either contrary to Sackett or needlessly redundant. It should add clarifying language that defines relatively permanent and continuous surface connection, and it should revise exclusions to add clarity on what water features are not WOTUS. Further, the agency needs to better define what relatively permanent means. Only relatively permanent rivers, streams, lakes, and ponds connected to traditional interstate navigable waters should be POTUS. Rapinoe's plurality opinion is very clear that ephemeral waters are not WOTUS. It's just as clear that most intermittent waters are not WOTUS. The rule needs to make that exceedingly clear. Under Sackett, wetlands are jurisdictional only if they directly abut a WOTUS in such a way that the WOTUS and the wetland are indistinguishable from one another. There must be no clear demarcation between waters and wetlands. And ditches, most ditches and all constructed farm ditches. This shouldn't be a surprise, but the EPA staff, it has been shocking to see them unable to differentiate between an actual stream and a ditch when we've taken on farm tours. No farm ditches should ever be included as a WOTUS. They should be excluded because they are neither streams, oceans, rivers, or lakes. Finally, exclusions, the agency should seek the codification of additional exclusions that are clear and broadly applicable. MPPC agrees with the administration that the agency should revise the 2023 definition of WOTUS to ensure full alignment with Sackett and that they can do so expeditiously. We greatly appreciate the efforts of Administrator Zeldin and the Trump administration to finally bring durable relief to farmers and landowners. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michael. Next up, we have Caitlin McHale. Caitlin?
Great. Thank you so much, Stacy. Good morning. I am Caitlin McHale, Associate General Counsel at the National Mining Association. I'm joining you from Macon, Georgia. So like Courtney, I am having some major WOTUS FOMO today, but really appreciate the opportunity to speak. The NMA is the official voice of the entire U.S. mining industry and the hundreds of thousands of Americans it employs. Our 250 plus members include the producers of most of the nation's coal, metals, and agricultural and industrial minerals. Our members include small and large businesses across the country. The raw materials our members mine are used for nearly every industrial and consumer product. Mining operations are extremely capital intensive and must be planned 5 to 10 or even more years in advance. We therefore need a WOTUS rule that can be relied upon for more than one political administration before changing again, so that mining operators can design projects to avoid impacts to WOTUS. We appreciate the agency's proactive and transparent outreach to stakeholders and for opening a docket to provide recommendations. We agree with much of what has already been discussed today, but want to highlight 3 primary comments and recommendations for your consideration. First, we strongly support the agency's reconsideration of WOTUS and the opening of this docket. The NMA was pleased with the clear majority opinion in Sackett versus EPA, but we were disappointed that the agencies failed to faithfully implement the Sackett decision on the ground. Following Sackett and the 2023 conforming rule, many of our members continue to experience significant delays in obtaining jurisdictional determinations and other decisions from the agencies. Some HADs were delayed as long as 18 months. These delays from the agency's inability to make decisions put important projects and the employees and communities that rely on them at risk. As others have mentioned, we also urge the agencies to undergo a targeted notice and comment rulemaking to revise the conforming rule to ensure that any changes are legally durable. The March 12th implementation guidance on continuous surface connection and the rescission of the ad hoc implementation field memos were a very welcome first step. The conforming rule appropriately struck the significant nexus concept from the 2023 rule as Sackett required, but again, as others have mentioned, additional regulatory revisions and revisions to the preamble are necessary to ensure full alignment with Sackett. These revisions can be done most efficiently and durably through a targeted rulemaking. Second, when it comes to the agency's specific request for feedback on relatively permanent, we urge the agencies to clarify that all ephemeral features and some intermittent features are not relatively permanent. Ephemeral features, those features that only contain water in direct response to rain or precipitation, are not relatively permanent and should be excluded. With regard to continuous surface connection, the agency should amend the definition of adjacent to incorporate the indistinguishability element of the continuous surface connection requirement. We have heard from our members that some core districts in the past had been considering any physical connection to constitute a continuous surface connection, even when that connection is dry. The agency should clarify that situations like those do not constitute a continuous surface connection. With regard to ditches, we urge the agencies to clarify that most ditches are not WOTUS. Ditches are commonly found on mine sites nationwide, and due to the dynamic nature of mining operators must constantly maintain, modify, move, and reclaim them. A clear exclusion for most ditches in any future regulatory actions would be very helpful for our members. And finally, the viability of the waste treatment system exclusion is a top priority for our industry. We therefore urge the agencies to ensure that in any future regulatory action, the longstanding waste treatment system is preserved and clarified to ensure that it encompasses both active and passive treatment and all the components of the system. The definition from the Navigable Waters Protection Rule is a great place to start in providing that clarity. Again, we really appreciate the agency's proactive outreach here and the opportunity to file written comments and speak today. We know this important work will take a lot of collaboration between EPA, the Corps, states, and our sectors, and we really look forward to working with you on next steps. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Caitlin. Next up, we have Mallory Tatum. Mallory?
Good morning. My name is Mallory Tatum, and I'm an environmental scientist at Zev Cohen & Associates Incorporated, a small business based in Florida. My firm supports a wide range of clients, from individual homeowners looking to build their dream home to developers of major residential and commercial projects in our region. I'm here today to emphasize a growing concern. The current definition of waters of the United States and how it's being implemented is not working in the real world. Trying to apply a federal rule written in legal and technical language to real sites in real time across vastly different ecosystems is a challenge we face daily, and I recognize the difficulty the agencies are facing writing a rule that can be applied to each and every circumstance. Cheers to you. Florida's flatwoods and seasonal wetlands are very different from the desert washes in Arizona or headwater streams in the Appalachians, and yet we're expected to apply big definitions like relatively permanent or continuous surface connection without clear field-based indicators. That creates confusion. It leads to inconsistent decisions and real-world impacts for landowners, developers, small businesses, and consultants at small businesses like myself. Let me be clear, we support regulation. Strong science-based rules are the backbone of environmental protection, and they keep us employed. As professionals, we help our clients navigate and comply with these regulations in the field. When the rules are clear and grounded in sound science, it allows us to provide accurate advice, avoid delays, and ensure that both development and environmental stewardship move forward hand in hand. Regulation, when done right, benefits everyone. Families building their dream home, developers investing in the local economy, residential builders helping meet local housing demands, and the environment we all depend on. But when the rules are unpredictable or differ depending on who you ask or where you are, the system collapses. We can't give clients an accurate interpretation of WOTUS. We can't give clients accurate timelines or cost estimates. Permits are delayed, projects stalled, jobs are lost, economies suffer, and we as professionals lose credibility. We're not asking for deregulation. We're asking for a durable, understandable rule, one that can be applied in the field consistently across regions, one that can provide regulatory certainty without confusion or reinterpretation. A rule that can be interpreted clearly and reliably by all who are subject to it, from scientists and regulators to landowners, land managers, industry professionals, and agricultural industries, so that those utilizing the land can determine with confidence whether federal jurisdiction applies. We need clear definitions, real-world examples, field indicators with definitive answers, and predictable permit measures and timelines. Above all, we need a rule that reflects how ecosystems actually function and how professionals are expected to implement it on the ground. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next up, we have Kari Fisher, or Carrie, apologies.
Good morning. My name is Carrie Fisher. I am the Senior Director and Counsel of the Legal Advocacy Division of the California Farm Bureau Federation. California Farm Bureau is California's largest farm organization, comprised of 54 county farm bureaus, currently representing approximately 27,000 agricultural, associate, and collegiate members in 57 counties. We have submitted comments on all of the agency's prior rulemakings and guidance documents on this issue. In all of our comments, California Farm Bureau has consistently urged the agencies to provide certainty to the agricultural community and landowners and avoid adopting expansive theories of Clean Water Act jurisdiction that, one, are not based on relevant Supreme Court precedent on the definition of WOTUS, specifically as stated in Sackett and Rapanos. 2, effectively read the term navigable out of the statute. And 3, fail to preserve the state's traditional and primary authority over land and water use. We urge the agencies to ensure that the definition and application of WOTUS is consistent with U.S. Supreme Court law and is clear for landowners, farmers, and ranchers to know what is and what is not a WOTUS. Lasting clarity in correcting the agency's overbroad misapplication of WOTUS is needed because of the significant penalties that farmers and ranchers face, even for inadvertent violations on their farms. Regarding the agency's specific request for comments on key terms, we offer the following. The term relatively permanent should follow Rapanos, where Justice Scalia stated that the Clean Water Act's use of waters encompasses only those that are relatively permanent, standing, or continuously flowing bodies of water, forming geographical features that are described in ordinary parlance of streams, oceans, rivers, and lakes. In Rapanos, Justice Scalia also emphasized that ephemeral and intermittent streams are not regulated as a federal WOTUS, writing, "The phrase water of the United States does not include channels through which water flows intermittently or ephemerally, and that the restriction of the waters of the United States to exclude channels containing merely intermittent or ephemeral flow also accords with the common sense understanding of the term." Regarding the term continuous surface connection and adjacent, the agencies must revise the definition of adjacent to clarify that wetlands are jurisdictional only when they are indistinguishably part of another water of the U.S. Regarding ditches, ditches are critical infrastructure for farmers and ranchers in California. Ditches are critical to ensuring proper drainage and flood prevention on agricultural fields in order to grow food and fiber. Following Sackett, ditches should generally be excluded from waters of the U.S. because they are not bodies of water described in the ordinary parlance of streams, oceans, rivers, and lakes. We also urge the agencies to retain and codify exclusions such as prior converted croplands. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next up, we have Niall Elam. Niall? All right, moving on to Andy Reiber. Andy?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Good morning. Thank you very much for holding this session. This is Andy Reiber. I am a public lands consultant for Humboldt County, Nevada. In Northern Nevada, we are largely supported in our economy through crop agriculture and livestock raising, and the scope of federal jurisdiction under the Clean Water Act directly affects our constituents' use and improvement of irrigation waters for agricultural purposes. I'd like to highlight a point that has been brought up previously, which is the importance of the agencies recognizing in developing these regulations of the primacy of state and political subdivisions for creating regulatory management of waters within their jurisdictions. So we do definitely respect and honor the federal agency's responsibility to manage waters within their purview. However, the cooperative federalism structure of the statute also recognizes the primacy of states and political subdivisions in sharing the burden of managing and regulating waters. I would also like to echo a point that was brought up, that the Sackett decision helps us to clarify that there are three and only three primary categories of WOTUS waters: the traditional interstate navigable waters, the waters that are relatively permanent standing or flowing waters connected to the first category, and wetlands, which are adjacent to either the first or second categories. And I think it's important for the EPA and Army Corps of Engineers to ensure that their definition of WOTUS reflects those three and only those three categories. Of particular importance to Humboldt County is where irrigation ditches fall within the definition of WOTUS. And what we are urging the agencies to consider is that irrigation ditches should be categorically excluded for several reasons. One, irrigation ditches are not waters under the Sackett and Rapinoe's definition. That is, irrigation ditches are not geographical features described in ordinary parlance as streams, rivers, lakes, and oceans. Second, irrigation ditches are not reasonably considered relatively permanent waters. They are largely, by their very definition of use, intermittent, and they certainly do not rise to the level in the Rapinoe's plurality of seasonal, that is a 290-day a year flowing water. The last point I'd like to make on this score is that irrigation ditches are not tributaries, they are distributaries. That is, they remove waters and move waters away from potential WOTUS waters as opposed to being tributaries where the water flow is into potentially jurisdictional waters. I think this is a key point because when water is not flowing into potential jurisdictional waters, the question of whether pollution is going to be an operative point isn't on the table because the ditch is not actually contributing flow into potentially jurisdictional waters. And that gets back to the purpose of the Clean Water Act, which is to protect the nation's waters from pollution. So on that, I will conclude requesting that irrigation ditches fail the WOTUS definition for several key points. And for that reason, we're asking that irrigation ditches be categorically excluded from the WOTUS definition. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, I believe we have Marla Peak next. Marla?
Good morning. Hello, I'm Marla Peak with the Oklahoma Farm Bureau, Oklahoma's largest agricultural organization with about 80,000 member families. Thank you for the opportunity to give comments in this WOTUS listening session. Oklahoma Farm Bureau endorses the written comments submitted by the American Farm Bureau Federation. The definition of WOTUS affects the activities of Oklahoma's farmers and ranchers. We believe the administration has an opportunity to produce a durable rule that injects clarity and certainty into the WOTUS definition. A flawed definition that designates ditches, including irrigation ditches, stock ponds, other water impoundments, and low spots in farm fields and pastures, as WOTUS opens the door to regulations of ordinary farming activities. A defective WOTUS definition could subject farmers and ranchers to Clean Water Act enforcement actions with harsh civil and criminal penalties for performing everyday activities such as plowing, planting, building fence, fertilizing, spraying pesticides and herbicides in or near ephemeral drainage, impoundments, ditches, or low spots without a federal permit. We especially want to emphasize that groundwater is not a WOTUS. Groundwater does not meet the statutory or judicial definitions of navigable. Groundwater regulation has traditionally been left to the states, which manage groundwater quality and quantity through separate legal frameworks. Oklahoma's waters of the state encompass more waters than WOTUS. Several Oklahoma state agencies competently regulate and protect Oklahoma's waters. In the U.S. Supreme Court Sackett opinion, Justice Alito acknowledged an amicus brief submitted by several state farm bureaus when he wrote, "States can and will continue to exercise their primary authority to combat water pollution by regulating land and water use." On behalf of Oklahoma's farmers and ranchers, Oklahoma Farm Bureau encourages a WOTUS rule that will create regulatory certainty by incorporating appropriate Supreme Court precedents and congressional intent. Thank you.
Thank you very much. As a reminder, if you did call in to the Zoom platform, please use *9 to raise your hand so that we can identify you to unmute your microphone. Next up, we have Kim Brackett. Kim?
I'm a cattle producer from Idaho and vice president of the National Cattlemen's Beef Association. Am I muted?
No, we can hear you, Kim.
I'm sorry. Thank you. Not using my own device. Again,
No
my name
problem.
is Brackett. I'm a cattle producer from Idaho and vice president of the National Cattlemen's Beef Association. Thank you for providing an opportunity to agricultural stakeholders to provide feedback on the current implementation of WOTUS and future agency action. Collectively, cattle producers are the United States' largest land manager, grazing on nearly a third of our nation's continental landmass. America's cattle producers prioritize two things when it comes to WOTUS: practicality and durability. For far too long, cattle producers have been unable to determine whether features on their property are federally jurisdictional. The unanimous court in Sackett found this lack of practicality not only a violation of the Clean Water Act, but a violation of a landowner's constitutional due process rights. A practical WOTUS definition will allow the average landowner, not an engineer, not an attorney, not a wetland specialist, to walk out on their property, see a water feature, and make, at minimum, a preliminary determination about whether a feature is federally jurisdictional. In developing a practical WOTUS definition, NCBA supports clear definitions for continuous surface connection and relative permanence. We additionally support the explicit exclusion of ephemeral features, ditches, subsurface drainage, stock ponds, and waste treatment systems. Finally, interstate waters that do not satisfy another jurisdictional category of WOTUS should not be jurisdictional based on their interstate status alone. Cattle producers across the country have operations that stretch across state boundaries, as I do. Many of these operations have ephemeral features, isolated features, or wetlands that weave from one jurisdiction to another. These features certainly do not contribute to interstate commerce and would not be jurisdictional if they did not cross a state line. The unnecessary regulation of these features stretches the agencies beyond its means, dedicating valuable resources to features that contribute little to downstream water quality. Cattle producers who have owned land since the passage of the Clean Water Act have dealt with 14 different regulatory iterations of WOTUS. This severely limits a landowner's ability to plan for the future. As we look to the future, America's cattle producers look forward to settling this question once and for all and appreciate the agency's work on this important issue. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next up, we have Diantha Skibinski. All right, moving to Richard Gupton. Richard?
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, you just got unmuted. Thank you. Okay, thank you for EPA for hosting this listening session today. I'm Senior Vice President of Public Policy and Counsel for the Agricultural Retailers Association. We advocate on behalf of the nation's ag retailers and distributors in Washington, D.C. Our members provide goods and services to farmers and ranchers, which include seed, crop protection chemicals, fertilizer, crop scouting, soil testing, custom application of pesticides and fertilizers, and nutrient management plans. And we have retail distribution facility members that are located all across the country. That's from family-held businesses to large companies to farmer cooperatives. There are several EPA Clean Water Act regulations that directly impact ag retailers, such as the spill prevention, control, and countermeasures, regulations for fuels and oils, the National Pollution Discharge Elimination System pesticide general permit for aquatic pesticides, and there's new regulations that'll be implemented dealing with Clean Water Act hazardous substance facility response plan requirements. So there's a lot of EPA regulations in place that are directly tied to the Clean Water Act that have compliance costs on our members. There's even potentially, with the issues we're talking about today, even more significantly impacts on farmer and ranchers, which are our members' customers and their ability to produce crops and raise livestock. And stand by the comments that were made by American Farm Bureau, National Pork Producer Councils, and a number of other speakers today. They seem like common sense solutions, which are in short supply in Washington, D.C. So we appreciate the Administrator Zeldin's initiative, Powering the Great American Comeback. We think this initiative to provide clarity to the regulations is important. We've been eagerly awaiting these clear definitions on WOTUS since the Supreme Court's Sackett decision. And we value this initiative that you're taking today. We anticipated that this would take place after Sackett. Unfortunately, the previous administration did minimal changes in response to it, and they were woefully inadequate. So we look forward to being engaged with the agencies to provide that clarity. And I'll just provide some support, which has already been made, about making sure that relatively permanent standard really connects to continuous year-round flow of waters, that the wetlands are indistinguishable and have a continuous surface connection to WOTUS waterways, and that there are clear exemptions and exclusions that has been mentioned today for not only farmers and ranchers, but ag retailers as well, because they can operate their property and have severe penalties depending on how the agencies move with this issue. And it was pointed out, if it's not covered under the Clean Water Act, the state agencies in the states have jurisdiction over a vast amount of waterways in the U.S. to make sure we're protecting the waterways, making sure we have sustainable agricultural practices and protecting our environment, but also produce affordable food. And so we look forward to working with agencies to work on that clarity, and with these other groups we're talking about, and certainly appreciate what you're doing. If there's efforts to provide additional regulatory clarity on the other regulations I mentioned that are tied to the Clean Water Act, we think that'll go a far way to reduce regulatory compliance, but also continue to protect the environment. Again, thank you for the opportunity today, and look forward to working with the agency.
Thank you very much. Next up, we have Philip McGinnis. Philip.
I'm sorry, was I not unmuted?
No, now you are. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I am Philip McGinnis. Good morning. McGinnis Commercial Real Estate Company in Dover, Delaware, and a member of the Realtors Land Institute, affiliated with the National Association of Realtors. Thank you for holding this listening session concerning the importance of a clear and consistent regulatory framework related to waters of the U.S. RLI members who come from all over the country strive to elevate professionalism in the land industry and share a nuanced understanding of land and of the land brokerage business, which encompasses farms and ranches, recreational land, timberland, transitional land, and development and subdivision land. The definition of WOTUS has significant implications for private property rights and the value of land nationwide. A clear and consistent WOTUS regulation will protect clean water, which is vital for economic development and which will strengthen communities. RLI supports clean water, which is integral to and protective of private property values, and we support robust real estate activity, which provides jobs and economic development to communities. RLI believes that both of these goals can be achieved through a WOTUS definition that provides clarity and certainty to regulated stakeholders and those who want to use the land to create economic wealth. A consistent and stable WOTUS regulation provides regulatory clarity for developers over the long term because it offers predictability and reduces legal uncertainty. I am involved in what is now my third working group with the Delaware legislature over the past 25 years concerning the regulation of isolated upland freshwater wetlands, which seems to expand and contract based upon the then current definition of WOTUS. Our Department of Natural Resources seems to think that these upland wetlands have been expanded by 75,000 acres since the last two Supreme Court decisions, which the department now claims needs to be regulated through the state agency. Tax ditches and drainage ditches should definitely be excluded. There are financial burdens to timing for approvals and the cost of regulation and cost of waiting for approvals that result from changing the definition of WOTUS back and forth. Smart regulation can strike a balance. An effective and consistent WOTUS definition will protect vital water resources and provide clear and fair rules for landowners to encourage responsible economic activity. A clear, consistent definition helps industries avoid costly litigation and project delays. A clear WOTUS rule ensures permits are issued faster, reducing red tape and, again, expensive project delays. Predictable rules enable better long-term investment and planning. Thank you for the opportunity to offer these remarks, and we respectfully request that a clear and consistent definition of waters of the U.S. is our quick outcome. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next up, we have Christina Grunhagen.
Thank you and good morning. My name is Christina Grunhagen. I'm Senior Government Relations Counsel with the Iowa Farm Bureau Federation. The Iowa Farm Bureau is Iowa's largest general farm organization, representing approximately 159,000 members, which includes landowners and farmers impacted by the WOTUS definition. We support the comments previously made by the American Farm Bureau and my State Farm Bureau colleagues. Iowa Farm Bureau appreciates the agency's consideration of the WOTUS definition to ensure consistency with the Supreme Court precedent and that it provides a clear delineation of what is a jurisdictional water. Broadly speaking, land should not be classified as a jurisdictional water. My comments today are going to focus on the prior converted cropland exemption to the WOTUS definition. Prior converted cropland should be considered land and not a jurisdictional water. The WOTUS definition should permanently exclude prior converted cropland from the definition of WOTUS, as articulated in the 2020 Navigable Waters Protection Rule. This land has been permanently converted from a wetland, and so it is not a relatively permanent water. While the land at some point connects to a water, stormwater temporarily present on a prior converted cropland does not create a permanent surface connection to a WOTUS. Now, while prior converted cropland is a term used by USDA, the exclusion should not require a USDA determination to be considered a prior converted cropland for several reasons. As a practical matter, prior converted cropland has been permanently converted, and it does not have wetland characteristics. An official USDA determination does not change these basic facts. Requiring permits for land management activities or Section 402 permits makes no practical sense because it is land, not water. Not every tract of land has had a formal prior converted cropland determination, but it has the same characteristics of having been converted to cropland prior to 1985. Another issue is that some USDA offices have purged their older records for space-saving reasons, which may make some finding and locating those prior determinations inaccessible. Requiring a new USDA determination and then a Clean Water Act jurisdictional determination unnecessarily adds to the regulatory burden and delays in being able for farmers to manage their land. Further, if prior converted cropland loses its status through abandonment, it should still have to meet the jurisdictional requirements for a wetland, such as having a continuous surface connection and having wetland conditions. It should not then automatically become a jurisdictional water. And finally, if there is a change in use from cropland, the characteristics of the land doesn't change. The USDA's change in use policy for Farm Bill purposes does not affect Clean Water Act jurisdiction. Land that is prior converted cropland should continue to be exempted even if there is a change in its use. Thank you for this opportunity to comment today. The historical exemption for prior converted cropland is critically important to farmers and should be maintained in the definition of WOTUS. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next up, we had Ward Marati. Ward.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
We sure can.
Great. Thank you. Ward Marotti with Spangler Environmental, Director of Natural Resources. I've also been president of the North Carolina chapter of the National Association of Environmental Professionals for quite a number of years. Currently sit on that national board, as well as the Home Builders Association of Greater Charlotte area. I've been a Clean Water Act practitioner for over 30 years, and I participated in the regulatory interpretation of waters of the United States on behalf of public and private permit applicants from the Pacific to the Atlantic to the Gulf, from Canada to Mexico, and from the Cascades to the Appalachians. While the appropriateness of the type, location, and extent of features subject to the Clean Water Act is important, the primary two shortcomings that my clients have expressed to me over the years are predictability and consistency. To that end, while I'm glad to provide my thoughts regarding some specific components of the WOTUS definition and recent interpretations, my emphasis here is again on behalf of the permitted public, predictability and consistency. One of the primary inconsistencies that I've seen, particularly recently, is with regard to connectivity and features resultant jurisdictional status. Continuous surface connection should not be provided by non-jurisdictional features. For example, if there's a hillside seep that's clearly a wetland, but is connected to downstream, downhill floodplain wetlands that are indistinguishable from a perennial stream, if that connection is by an ephemeral channel, that is one that only flows in direct response to precipitation events, that seep should not be considered a water of the United States. On the other hand, if that feature is connected to the downstream, downhill wetland features by a perennial stream, it should be a water of the United States. Ephemeral channels should not be considered waters of the United States. A similar distinction should be made for other features connecting the seep to the floodplain, wetlands, and waters. Swales, for example, which are not wetlands, having the three necessary parameters that define a wetland: hydrology, vegetation, and soils, should not be provide accurate connectivity to have that hillside seep be considered a water of the United States. It's been my experience many times, particularly here in the Southeast, that as previously described, the seep has been considered a WOTUS as the result of the connection with the swale or other ephemeral conveyance. Another common connectivity interpretation inconsistency that I see is with regard to artificial separation from man-made features such as culverts, constructed berms, and levees. It's my opinion that an artificial separation should not remove jurisdiction. This would end jurisdiction behind the first culvert from the ocean or the Mississippi River. Natural separations, however, should remove jurisdiction. While the 12 March memorandum to the field that a number of other folks have referenced intends to address these issues, I've not seen these issues consistently resolved where the rubber meets the road and the interpretation is conveyed from Corps of Engineers and other regulators. That is, I've seen some regulatory pushback with regard to what the memo says or does not say, and thereby what its appropriate interpretation is. As stated already today by a few others, I'd also like to mention the regulated community's desire for consistent and predictable response to jurisdictional determination, submittals, and requests, particularly approved jurisdictional determinations, which speak not only to features, locations, and extents, but also their jurisdictional status. Unlike the permitting process, there are not response timeline requirements associated with standalone jurisdictional determination submittals. This does not facilitate permittees' accurate and implementable planning and impact quantification. In other words, if project proponents are unable to get or are unable to have a timeline associated with their submittals, requests for jurisdictional determinations, they have no way of using agreed upon definitive locations and extents in their design practices. That needs to change as part of this recent review. With that, I'll close again with an emphasis on predictability and consistency. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next up, we have Tim Kellogg. Tim?
Well, my name is Tim Kellogg. I am president of Templeton Property Consultants in Illinois, a farmland owner and a member of the Realtors Land Institute. RLI members across the U.S. strive to be the voice of land within the real estate industry by sharing a very diverse understanding of land across this great country. Thank you for holding this listening session to gather input concerning the importance of clear and consistent waters of the U.S. regulatory framework. The definition of WOTUS has significant implications for private property rights and the value of land nationwide. Clear and consistent WOTUS regulation will protect clean water, which is vital for economic development and which will strengthen communities. RLI supports clean water, which is integral to and protective of private property values, and we support robust real estate activity, which provides jobs and economic development to communities. RLI believes that both these goals can be achieved through a WOTUS definition that provides clarity and certainty to regulated stakeholders. Consistent and stable regulation provides regulatory clarity over the long term because it offers predictability and reduces legal uncertainty. Personally, I was especially excited to hear Mr. Bridgeforth's background during the introductions. I am speaking to you from my family's farm, where I am the 7th generation and my children are the 8th generation to live, and where my family for 179 years has produced food for so many and hopes to continue to do so for generations to come. Also, being educated as a civil engineer and accredited land consultant, I work to provide land for businesses and much needed new homes. Both my family and work experience have combined to provide firsthand knowledge as to the challenges of trying to understand unclear WOTUS guidance, with agency interpretation even inconsistent from one area to another. With the Sackett ruling, I feel it's clear that WOTUS includes only 3 categories of waters. First is traditional interstate navigable waters. Second is permanent bodies of water connected to these navigable waters, and third being wetlands with a continuous surface connection to the first 2. When these 3 are combined with clarifying language that defines a relatively permanent and continuous surface connection, and also is revised to include exclusions to provide clarity on what water features are not WOTUS, clear guidance is obtainable. Poorly drafted and unclear regulation leads to a disproportionate burden on small businesses and rural economies. Unlike large corporations, small operations may struggle with the cost of consultants, lawyers, permitting, and delays resulting from the definition of WOTUS changing back and forth. RLI feels that smart regulation can strike a balance. An effective and consistent WOTUS definition will protect vital water resources and provide clear and fair rules for landowners to encourage responsible economic activity. We respectfully request a clear and consistent definition for the waters of the U.S. is soon to come. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Next up, we have David Huetter. David?
Thank you. Can you all hear me okay?
Yes, we can, David.
Great, thank you. Yes, my name is David Huetter. I am a consultant with over 30 years of experience working primarily across the southeastern United States. We represent a wide range of industries, including aggregate producers, large industrial developers, and others. It's interesting listening to the comments that there's a clear, consistent approach here or comment and concern, and that is some consistency and some clarity with regard to the rules. Having done this for 30 years and having dealt with and seen the changes with all of the different administrations, it's very important that we can get some consistency and hopefully a rule that can be passed along and be used for many years to come so that we don't have changes every time a new administration comes in. But more specifically with regard to these, some of these definitions that we need. Again, the definitions need to have very clear and concise, detailed approach and outline. When it comes to relatively permanent flow, I think that needs to consider the length of time that the feature flows, the field characteristics that that feature has in order to identify whether or not that feature is a relatively permanent water. I think something somebody mentioned earlier, I think it was Laura out of Michigan mentioned that things are different in different areas, and having one rule that applies across the entire United States may not be appropriate. Regional conditions or regional supplements were put together for wetland delineations, and I think something like that may be appropriate here when we're looking at relatively permanent waters. A perennial or an intermittent or ephemeral stream in one part of the country may look very different in another part. So I think we need to have some some very, specific guidelines, examples, photographs, that kind of thing to show that. And with regard to continuous surface connection, how much of a disconnect is enough of a disconnect for something to no longer be regulated? If abutting is the term, then that's immediately adjoining. If it's a foot separation, is that enough to say that this feature is no longer connected? I think it was Ward just a minute ago that mentioned a seep. And if you have a seep, and if that seep goes underground and it's not directly connected, or it's only connected through an ephemeral channel, then that seep shouldn't be regulated. But we need some guidance on how much separation is enough to say a feature is no longer abutting and is no longer jurisdictional. And lastly, with regard to ditches, again, there's been a consensus here, and clearly things like agricultural ditches and stuff, erosional features should not be jurisdictional. But also when it comes to roadside ditches, we run into a lot of issues with roadside ditches where they may now be connecting certain things. So they may now have water in them for a large portion of the year because they're dug out in low-lying areas that stormwater flow sits in those ditches and stays in those ditches for extended periods of time. So there needs to be some clarity, particularly with regard to roadside and roadway ditches, so we can understand when those should be considered jurisdictional, and maybe specific characteristics that we need to be looking for in those situations would be greatly appreciated. And thank you again for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you. Next up, we have Matthew Gamble. Matthew?
Hello, my name is Matt Gamble, and I'm a manager and kayak tour guide and instructor at Nature Adventures LLC, which is right near Charleston, South Carolina. We offer kayak rentals and guided tours and lessons primarily on Shem Creek, which is a tidal saltwater marsh creek that connects to Charleston Harbor. We have a full-time staff of 5 people, part-time seasonal staff of about 20. We provide our clients with an opportunity to observe dolphins, manatees, sea turtles, pelicans, and numerous other birds and plants in their natural environment. And we take people out on the water to learn about local history and ecology from an up-close perspective. I've been working with this company for over 11 years and helped to facilitate trips for tens of thousands of clients. The South Carolina economy heavily relies on visitors to our state paying to have these kinds of experiences. Overall, the tourism industry brings in just under $24 billion to the state each year. We need to ensure that the coastline, one of our state's biggest assets, benefits from the protections of all of our state's waterways and rivers that flow to our coast. Clean water is vitally important for the massive amount of animals harvested as seafood in South Carolina that spend all or part of their lives in the salt marsh waters that we paddle through. These marshes provide filtration of pollutants, a buffer from wind and wave erosion, and protection from storm surge floods. For many of our clients, they leave with core memories that ultimately rely on the overall health of these ecosystems. Shem Creek is home to many restaurants, tourism-based industries are thriving, and a decades-old shrimping industry still actively harvests wild shrimp for commercial sale. All these industries that employ hundreds of staff and crew are dependent on healthy waters and critical to my company's success and profitability. Mitigation is essential to fix unhealthy and impacted waterways and to ensure responsible growth and development along the rivers that flow into Charleston Harbor. We need strong protections based on peer-reviewed science of how these waterways are connected. We need to accurately define waterways and wetlands that need protection, and we need to know that the coastline has enough problems without having to also worry about the contaminants flowing into our harbor from upstream sources. Development is continuing at an all-time high in my region, specifically on our coast in areas where wetlands are abundant and risk disappearing without protection. I believe that in order to preserve our coastal resources, we need a strong definition of waters of the United States to guarantee that development can occur responsibly and critical wetlands are preserved. It's clear to me that our waterways are interconnected and valuable, so any threat to our creeks, rivers, and wetlands also threatens downstream water, including Charleston Harbor. Our entire region could easily suffer from a decline in the seafood industry or loss of tourism revenue, which directly impacts me and the company that I work for. The EPA should ensure these waters and wetlands are protected because they're valuable in their own rights, and they should not take action to weaken its definitions of waterways and wetlands that protect the aquatic ecosystems relied on by numerous species, including ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew. Next up, Robert Jackson. Is Robert here? No. Okay. Next up, then we have Brian North. Brian, are you able to, can we unmute him? Oh. Let's go back to Robert Jackson then if we can.
Hello, this is Robert Jackson. Can you hear me okay?
Great. Yes. Thank you, Robert.
Thank you. Robert Jackson, Wilmington, North Carolina. Landowner, land developer, home builder, and I am the vice chair of the National Association of Home Builders Environmental Issue Committee. And I appreciate very much the opportunity to speak, but also your trust and effort to get us together, hopefully in one accord. One of the challenges of being the 35th speaker on the list is the lack of redundancy, and my colleagues have done an excellent job of clearly and concisely sharing the pitfalls of prior regulatory actions and inconsistencies, all of which have damaged the long-term relationships between stakeholders and agencies, and most importantly to me, the good employees of the agencies, specifically the Corps, who often arrive at properties with confusing guidance and regional interpretations. What we have experienced over the past 30 years has been detrimental to the public and private relationships and trust that ultimately is critical to long-term compliance. After all, the end goal of this marriage between WOTUS and SCOTUS, to steal that from the introductory speaker, should be compliance with the regulatory framework we can all understand and follow. The good people of the Corps deserve a better work environment, and the millions of property owners in our great country are demanding clear, simple, and concise guidance. The elephant in the cloud, if you will, here is the last step of a good and fair regulatory framework once we have completed this agency process, and that is transparency. If we expect it, we need to inspect it. We need the agencies to adopt a fully transparent online disclosure and accounting of the national regulatory workflow, including field training manuals, memos, even on a district level, application details, timelines, number of approvals, denials, and appeals. This will help ultimately form the working relationship that we enjoyed dozens of years ago. Let me end with a quote from Henry David Thoreau. Let every man make known what kind of government would command his respect, and that will be one step toward obtaining it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bringing some levity as well today. All right. Next up is Brian North. I believe we've unmuted you, Brian. We'll give it one more second, Brian. It looks like we have unmuted you.
Can you hear me now?
There we go. Great.
Oh, thank you. I'm sorry. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. I'm Brian North, Vice President of Environmental Services of Martin Marietta's East Division. I'm also the past chairman of NSSGA's Environmental Committee. I've worked in the aggregates industry for 30 years. Hard to believe that 2 years have passed since the Supreme Court issued a unanimous decision on Sackett. We're still having discussions on what is considered a WOTUS. In Sackett, the Supreme Court intentionally used terms such as indistinguishable from waters of the U.S. and the phrase that the wetland has a continuous surface connection to that water, making it difficult in determining where the water ends and the wetland begins. Each of these phrases to be considered in making correct and accurate jurisdictional calls. In my opinion, these descriptions have yet to be fully implemented by the Corps. In some cases, ephemeral streams far removed from navigable waters are being used to exert jurisdiction. Difficult to understand how these features can be considered adjacent, much less a relatively permanent body of water connected to traditional interstate navigable waters. In the Biden administration's WOTUS rule, Corps postponed the issuance of AJDs and ignored previously issued 2020 rule AJDs. Corps needs to address the current backlog of AJDs that allow industries of all kinds to move forward on permitting on their critical projects. In 2014, Martin Marietta began conducting a wetland evaluation on a site and worked with the Corps for 3 years to complete this effort. In 2021, we received a 2020 rule AJD, removing about 32 acres from the previously approved PJD. The Biden administration's decision to invalidate all 2020 rule AJDs, we began to reevaluate the site under the pre-2015 rule. After the SACIT decision was issued, further reevaluations at the site were postponed. This decision was based on the Corps' guidance that was issued, which I would consider an incorrect interpretation of SACIT. Currently, we're at a standstill to proceed on how to permit this project. As a result of ever-changing interpretations of WOTUS, additional time, cost, and delays have occurred to reevaluate this site to obtain an acceptable JD necessary for permitting. Without it, construction aggregates will have to be trucked in from longer distances to meet the long-term needs of the region and the expectation of the bipartisan IIJA that Congress passed almost 3.5 years ago. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Up next, we have Lauren Lurkins.
Hello, my name is Lauren Lurkins. I'm an environmental attorney and a consultant based in Illinois. I am speaking today on behalf of the United Egg Producers, for whom I work as a consultant. UEP is a farmer cooperative that represents more than 90% of U.S. egg production, and we appreciate the opportunity to speak to this important issue today. Overall, UEP's members are committed both to modern egg production while at the same time protecting America's wetlands and waters. To start, we are members of the Waters Advocacy Coalition, and like the speaker a couple ahead of me, we echo a lot of the comments that have already been spoken to today by a lot of the WAC members. In addition, egg producers are looking forward to the current effort the EPA and the Corps are undertaking to define WOTUS consistent with the Supreme Court's interpretation of the scope of the Clean Water Act in SACIT versus EPA. We had hoped that this day would come before now, but we are grateful to this administration for taking this on early in its tenure. We look forward to the certainty and to the clarity that a durable rule can provide, and we look forward to the creation of definitions of key phrases like relatively permanent and continuous surface connection. Like most of the agricultural producers that have spoken today, in fact, it sounded like a majority of the commenters, egg producers could benefit from a clearer understanding of the role that ditches play or do not play in the WOTUS discussion. To be clear, in the eyes of UEP members, ditches should be excluded from the definition of WOTUS to the greatest extent possible. It is also important for the agencies to codify exclusions that are clear, not overly narrow, and that can be utilized in the real world by farmers, landowners, and the agencies themselves. For far too long, these exemptions have been little more than words on a page that were really elusive in real life across the country. In conclusion, UEP looks forward to participating in the agency's efforts to revise the 23 definition of WOTUS to ensure full alignment with SACIT and to do so expeditiously. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that, Lauren. And up next, we have Norman Semenko. I thought he was in the room.
Good morning. My name is Norm Semenko. I am an attorney and shareholder with Parsons, Bailey, and Latimer in our Boise, Idaho office. I'm a past president of the National Water Resources Association and currently vice chair of the Mountain States Legal Foundation's Legal Advisory Council. I serve as general counsel for the Family Farm Alliance, who I'm here on behalf of today. The Alliance is a grassroots organization of family farmers, ranchers, irrigation districts, and allied industries in 17 Western states. Our focus is the delivery of irrigation water to farms. This issue is a top priority for our organization because agriculture bears the brunt of expansive and ambiguous WOTUS definitions. The agency is currently seeking input on 3 general issues. The Alliance provides the following recommendations. Number 1, the scope of relatively permanent waters. Any future regulatory definition of WOTUS must, and we say must because this is not discretionary, this is not science, this is not policy, this is the Sackett decision, a majority decision. The court has spoken. Must, A, limit agency regulation to conventionally defined geographic features that in simple terms can be described as streams, oceans, rivers, and lakes, and B, set forth minimum flow volume and duration requirements to limit agency regulation to such features which contain continuously flowing or standing water for a majority of the year. Number 2, the scope of continuous surface water connection. Any future regulatory definition of WOTUS must A, expressly incorporate Sackett's central indistinguishability requirement for wetlands authority, B, categorically exclude from regulation those wetlands separated from covered waters by any natural or artificial barrier, and C, explicitly state that only those wetlands with a continuous aquatic surface water connection to covered waters be regulated. Number 3, the scope of jurisdictional ditches. A new proposed rule should state that the construction, operation, maintenance, repair, and rehabilitation of man-made ditches and canals, roadside ditches, and other features is not subject to WOTUS jurisdiction. We recommend that wastewater and stormwater treatment infrastructure be excluded from WOTUS. The Alliance acknowledges the agency's July 24th, 2020 ditch exemption memo is frequently used to perform work on implementing Clean Water Act Section 404 exemptions, and we urge you to maintain that guidance. We thank you for the opportunity to comment and ask that you also, in the future in the rulemaking, look at navigability and of the United States definitions as urged by Clarence Thomas in his well-reasoned concurrence in the Sackett decision. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Norman. And thanks for joining us in person. Our next up, I don't think we have Bob Perry on the line, but we do have Chris Hamilton. Chris?
Good morning. My name is Chris Hamilton, and I'm with Westwood Professional Services in Fort Worth, Texas. Thank you for this opportunity to provide feedback on the key aspects of the Waters US definitions, especially the terms continuous surface connection and relatively permanent. In the Sackett versus EPA case, the Supreme Court made it clear that the Clean Water Act jurisdiction of water such as streams applies solely to relatively permanent, standing and continuously flowing bodies of water. The Supreme Court also held that the Clean Water Act jurisdiction extends only to wetlands that are indistinguishable from Waters US and have a continuous surface connection to bodies of water that are Waters US. In making this rule, the court overruled the use of the significant texts to determine jurisdictional determinations. After the Sackett decision in 2023, the EPA did not provide adequate direction or guidance on the meaning of continuous surface connection or how the Corps engineer should interpret it. While the March 12th joint memorandum issued guidance to field staff regarding adjacent wetlands, additional clear and concise guidance is still needed for both the regulated public and agency staff. Future rules and guidance should clearly state that ephemeral and intermittent streams are not relatively permanent, standing, or continuously flowing water bodies, and therefore not jurisdictional. The regulated community, especially the agriculture, real estate, public, and energy sectors, have been dependent on interpretations of vague rules and regional guidance by local Corps engineer districts. The agency should take this opportunity to create bright line rules for what features are jurisdictional based on the Sackett decision. As mentioned previously, guidance to agency staff should be clear and concise and should take into account the Supreme Court's ruling in the Looper-Bright case overruling the Chevron deference. Thank you again for this opportunity to provide feedback and for making this opportunity available to the public.
Thank you very much, Chris. So at this point, you see that everybody who pre-registered has given their remarks. We are going to extend just a little bit until about 12:20 to allow some of the people on the wait list to go ahead and give some of their remarks. And I'm going to jump to that list now. Do you mind pulling that up? All right. The first person on the list is Brent Wills. Brent, are you still with us?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, Brent, we can hear you.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so I just thank you for the invitation. My name is Brent Wills. I am a soil and environmental consultant in Virginia. I have a company called Wills Soil and Stream. I do everything from write stormwater permits to doing JD jurisdictional determinations for development, but I do a lot of soil health work as well. I also am program manager for the Virginia Association for Biological Farming. So I work with a lot of small and mid-sized producers in Virginia. And thirdly, I'm a farmer, so I have a lot of sort of fingers in this pie, and sort of think about it from both sides of the fence. Specific to the rule in question, I look at the relative permanent definition based on storm, like I do stormwater. Storm flows only affect ephemeral and most intermittent channels in periods of rain, just like all non-jurisdictional areas that surround them. So I feel like that they should be regulated as such and not fall under jurisdiction. For the continuous surface connection, we all know that waters are linked underground in the water cycle, but soils and vegetation and other metrics are far different due to the being submerged, for certain periods of time. So continuous service connection should be obvious, and if it isn't, then there really shouldn't be. It shouldn't be regulated as continuous service connection. The one sort of last item I would like to bring up is when ditches, again, kind of goes back to my relative permanent argument and not be jurisdictional. The one thing I wanted to mention is in my work with a lot of farmers in Virginia, I find that if most farmers, if you explain to them the importance of wetlands and wet areas and streams, particularly to the overall ecosystem that they're managing, I find that a lot of farmers and land managers look at those areas a little differently than maybe what they had traditionally looked at them as being a problematic or an area that we quote need to drain. So I think a lot of this comes from an education standpoint, and I go back to I think it was Jay from Texas mentioned about educating farmers, how farmers should be able to go out and make those determinations. I think that would be a real benefit on both sides of the fence here, both for the regulators, but also for the land management public, particularly on the agricultural side. Thank you for your time.
Yeah, thank you for sticking with us this time, Brett. In the room, we have Addison Murtha.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm Addison Murtha with the National Turkey Federation. NTF appreciates the opportunity for today's listening session. We strongly support the agency's effort to revise WOTUS and develop, as Administrator Zeldin had noted, a durable solution and policy direction on WOTUS that focuses on bringing long-needed clarity and certainty for our farmers and landowners, aligns with the Supreme Court's approach in Sackett, simplifies the permitting process, and reduces regulatory burdens for animal agriculture. Our members are committed stewards of their operations, their land, and their community and their nation's water quality. They are also ready to welcome a rule that brings to a close the endless litigation and the definitional moving target that has characterized WOTUS over many years. With respect to essential recommendations, NTF and its members agree that EPA ensures that there are clear exemptions and exclusions for agriculture, that only relatively permanent waters and continuous surface connections to navigable waters fall under the federal jurisdiction, and there be an appropriate definition of their relatively permanent standard to make jurisdictional determinations. Others can address these and other legal and technical matter in greater detail, but on a practical level, on the WOTUS definition for turkey producers, we are in full agreement with input you've recently heard from key states, including those with large turkey populations. With the ultimate goal of federal jurisdiction is to be predictable, that bright lines be drawn on jurisdiction so that farmers can understand the rule just as well as the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, hydrologists, and those subject to federal law based on the WOTUS definition should be able to understand how the definition impacts their land without assistance from lawyers. Thank you again for your willingness to hold the session and for the opportunity to provide input today.
Thank you, Addison. All righty, next up we have on the line Russell Williams.
Good morning, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Good morning, my name is Russell Williams and I'm a 5th generation farmer farming in the Texas High Plains. On behalf of the National Corn Growers Association, thank you for the opportunity to provide our views on the proper definition of waters of the United States. NCGA applauds the agencies for addressing this matter with the goal of creating a durable definition of WOTUS that is fully consistent with the Supreme Court holdings. It is critical that this rulemaking take place expeditiously in order to provide certainty for growers as to what are and are not considered WOTUS on their farms. The Supreme Court has provided a well-defined path forward on a new and clear final rule. The agencies should revise the 23 rule to fully align with the Supreme Court holdings. We urge agencies not to attempt a lengthy repeal and replace rulemaking, as this would likely take years and would result in more litigation. In terms of substance, I'd like to focus on 4 key points. First, the Supreme Court has made it abundantly clear that only geographic features that are relatively permanent, standing, or continuously flowing bodies of water may be WOTUS. We urge the agencies to use this standard. The only gray area left by the Supreme Court that the agencies must interpret in the rules is how to define what relatively means. We suggest defining relatively to mean that over the course of a year, there be standing or continuously flowing water for more days than not. This definition would exclude ephemeral streams and intermittent streams from the definition of WOTUS. Second, consistent with the Supreme Court, the term adjacent, when used to identify wetlands that are WOTUS, must be defined to mean wetlands that have, except under extremely unusual weather conditions, a continuous surface water connection to a relatively permanent, standing, or continuously flowing body of water. The bottom line is that isolated wetlands are not WOTUS. Farm fields throughout large portions of corn-producing states contain small, isolated wetlands that lack continuous surface connection to relatively permanent water. These features should be excluded from consideration as WOTUS under the Supreme Court standards that we are supporting. Third, ditches, being man-made features that have always been integral to the intentional management of hydrological properties of managed agricultural landscapes, should not be considered WOTUS, except in very limited circumstances. This is also made clear by the Supreme Court. Fourth, prior converted cropland should be excluded from the definition of WOTUS and remain so even if the land has left agricultural use. If the land is abandoned and wetland functions and values return, prior converted cropland could only be deemed a WOTUS if it meets the adjacency test that requires continuous surface water connection to a relatively permanent water. Please reference NCGA's written comments and the Waters Advocacy Coalition's comments, of which NCGA is a member, for more details and a comprehensive recommendation. Thank you again for the opportunity to share our views.
Thank you very much, Russell. In the room, we have Faith Burns.
Thank you. Yes, I'm Faith Burns. I'm an Energy Policy Fellow at Americans for Prosperity. And on behalf of our organization, I too would like to thank you for holding these sessions and thank you for actually wanting to listen to us. That hasn't always been the case in prior years, so we appreciate that. We filed comments for the recommendations docket last week, and we focused primarily on 2 different issues. We focused on how the WOTUS rule can actually help promote permit reform, and we also focused on some of the implementation aspects of the rule. First of all, I'll address permit reform. Everybody who's dealt with the WOTUS rule knows that it is critical to have accurate permitting parameters and to know what you need to do. It's especially true in the energy sector, and I work on energy issues. And we have an electric grid right now that is increasing in its demand. We have a lot of data centers coming in, so the growth and the demand for the electricity sector is great. And we need permit reform on the WOTUS rule in order to be able to promote and to forward energy projects. Before any time we build a transmission line, before we build a natural gas plant, before a solar plant is put up or battery storage, you have to move dirt. And if you move dirt, potentially the Clean Water Act is impacted. Another factor that we think the agencies need to look at and pay close attention to is the implementation factor. I believe someone earlier said that the goal of the agencies is for clarity, simplicity, and practical implementation. And in order to have practical implementation, those in the field are going to need practical guidance and practical training. So we have a number of recommendations for not only your staff here in the headquarters office who will be writing the regulation, but those who will be out in the field implementing it. We recommend that everyone who's in the field who will be implementing this and those who write it will have should have a working knowledge of the Clean Water Act, the SACA decision, and all the other relevant Supreme Court decisions. We also recommend that your training that you have for your field staff be updated, and that those folks need to come to that training periodically, and that a one and done thing probably won't cut it. Perhaps have continuing WOTUS training for your field staff. Before a final recommendation is issued to a landowner, we recommend that you have a team of professionals assembled in the agencies that takes a look at that document to make sure it's factually accurate and legally defensible. And finally, We ask that you hold everyone, including your field staff, accountable for their jobs. The American people depend on it. And we know that these folks in this agency right now are the ones to do it. So we appreciate your time. Thank you. And we look forward to further Federal Register notices.
Thank you very much, Faith. All right, we think we'll get to about 2 more people, which leaves Rayleigh Honeycutt. May need to unmute Rayleigh. I will, just for a moment, I'll jump over to Eric Stewart. Rayleigh, go ahead and put in the chat if you're still online and would like to provide feedback. Eric Stewart, are you available?
Can you hear me now?
Yes. Hey, Rayleigh.
All right. Thank you so much. I'm Rayleigh Honeycutt, the Executive Vice President of the Montana Stock Growers Association, and it's my privilege to represent Montana ranchers today with some comments. Montana and all Americans cattle ranchers need an easy, understanding WOTUS definition that allows for a straightforward implementation. The Clean Water Act impacts all segments of the beef supply chain, and since the act has been put into passage in 1972, multiple generations of cattle ranchers have been continuing to deal with this back and forth tug of war of what the definition and regulations really mean. Agriculture in Montana is our industry's #1 industry. Over 93 million acres of rugged mountains and deep valleys and wide open plains are affected by this rule, and roughly 60 million of those acres are in farm and ranch production. Overbearing, unclear, and inconsistent policies are crippling our family-owned ranches, businesses, and our state economy. As an organization that represents ranchers who have cared for the land for multiple generations, we believe ranchers do an exceptional job in conserving and sustaining a clean water supply. So to quickly speak on some specifics, as a headwater state, Montana has a significant presence of ephemeral rivers and streams that only flow in the spring during snow runoff and after significant weather events. This is why it is imperative that these features remain in an exclusion. Second, the exclusion for farm stock water ponds create non-jurisdictional impounds is important to ranchers as well. These features are heavily relied upon by cattle producers. And third, I just wanted to quickly speak about ditches as well. Irrigation ditches play a critical role in ranching as it provides a consistent water supply following precipitation events across the state and during some of the driest times of the year. Most ditches have not historically been regulated by WOTUS, and they need to continue to be part of the exemption. In the final rule, cattle producers need a practical definition that gives certainty and clarity. And today we thank you for your opportunity to provide comments and look forward to continuing to work with the administration to provide that certainty and clarity to ranchers across this country. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rayleigh. And our final speaker for today will be Eric Stewart.
And testing to see you can hear me.
Yes, we can.
Great. Good afternoon. My name is Eric Stewart, Vice President of Environment and Sustainability for the Steel Manufacturers Association. I am here representing America's electric arc furnace steelmakers, which account for over 70% of the United States steelmaking capacity and are among the nation's largest recyclers by volume. SMA, the primary trade association for these EAF steelmakers, consists of 24 member companies that directly employ 75,000 hardworking Americans and indirectly generate more than 300,000 additional jobs for this economy. Our members have an interest in the agency's efforts to adopt a clear, consistent, and lawful interpretation of the scope of federal jurisdiction under the Clean Water Act, and in furthering cooperative federalism by appropriately delineating the activities subject to federal or state permitting under the Act. Notwithstanding the Supreme Court's issuance of 4 decisions interpreting the scope of federal jurisdiction under the CWA, the agency's regulations remain unclear and we believe impermissible. the manner in which the agencies construe relatively permanent waters, continuous surface connections, and federal jurisdiction over man-made ditches is unclear and inconsistent with binding Supreme Court case law. SMA supports and appreciates the agency's present effort to promulgate a definition of WOTUS that is durable, clear, and fully consistent with the CWA and Supreme Court interpretations. These efforts are essential to the growth and competitiveness of the domestic steel industry. As detailed in our written comments, SMA asked the agencies to consider the following as part of its rulemaking effort. Ensure that any regulatory revisions are as narrow and targeted as possible to help mitigate the litigation uncertainty that has plagued jurisdictional determinations for too long. Use plain language and objectively observable indicators that the regulated public can understand, and seek to streamline WOTUS implementation and permitting wherever possible. The agency should ensure that federal jurisdiction extends only to relatively permanent waters. This means only those features that ordinary people would recognize as water bodies, like streams, rivers, and lakes. The water bodies should actually be permanent, meaning that they continuously flow or contain water throughout the year, absent extraordinary circumstances. And for clarity, the agency should also identify water features that are categorically outside of federal jurisdiction. The agency should clarify the definition of continuous surface connections such that federal jurisdiction only applies to wetlands that directly abut and are indistinguishable from WOTUS. SMA appreciates the opportunity to provide these remarks and more detailed comments we submitted to the docket. We welcome the opportunity to work with the agencies on developing a WOTUS definition that comports with the CWA, as it has been repeatedly interpreted by the Supreme Court cases. We firmly believe that doing so is essential to the administration's efforts to protect and promote critical domestic industries like the EAF steelmakers SMA is proud to represent. I thank you for your time and consideration and for your efforts today to hold this listening event. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And unfortunately, we have run out of time to hear from the rest of our speaker wait list, but we want to remind you that we have some more upcoming listening sessions scheduled for May of this year for the public. We encourage you to attend those and provide your remarks then. As well as the agencies anticipate, we will solicit public comment on a forthcoming proposed rule, in which case we also would encourage you to provide your written feedback on the agency's proposal. I'm now going to pass it back over to Laura to close us out.
Hi, thank you. And thank you all for joining us today. On behalf of Peggy Brown, the Acting Assistant Administrator for Water, Turner Bridgeforth, and Elliot Carmen from the Army, I would like to thank you all for joining us today on the WOTUS listening session for industry and ag stakeholders. We enjoyed hearing from you and look forward to hearing more from you on this effort, particularly in those public sessions that Stella just mentioned. Additional information for those listening sessions can be found on our website, and feel free to email us at WOTUS, WOTUS, not that you needed to know how to spell that, _outreach@epa.gov if you have additional questions. And thank you. This concludes today's meeting. Have a great rest of your day.